There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
Where am I? Oh, I'm out here. Okay, I guess I'm out here. What's this? Paper plate with the top 7 best Outer Limits episodes written on it. Wow, that's pretty cool. Alright, let's do this then. Hey there people, Nicholas Cicada coming at you with another fresh batch of science fiction anthology series top 10 listicles. Last Halloween, of course, you did that top 5 worst and top 5 best Night Gallery episodes. And, you know, Night Gallery is one of those shows that doesn't get enough coverage, and I can definitely see that it has a huge fan base, and my Night Gallery video is one of my most watched. I never thought it would be, you know, it was just kind of a one-off video, but seriously, thanks a whole bunch. So I figured, you know, this October, why not go over the top 7 best Outer Limits episodes, because Outer Limits is also a really fun show. It has a lot of potential, and I think you know, it's underrated. Everyone talks about Twilight Zone. I think you know, I should talk about the lesser known anthology series. Just, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's some huge Outer Limits fans out there. So first off, welcome to the video. If you like what you see, you know, leave your favorite 7 below. I'll definitely be checking the comments and responding to you with reasons as to why you're right or why you're wrong, or yeah, just say it in the comments. But also, I should mention this before we go forward. I can't really think of a top 5 or top 7 worst Outer Limits episodes, mainly just because, you know, it's a pretty short show, only 49 episodes, and also just none of them are that bad. Like, there aren't any episodes of Outer Limits I can point to and say, yeah, this is a giant steaming pile of shit, except maybe the 1,000 Days of the Dragon one, just because it's kind of racist and outdated. But well, other than that, I mean, that's the only episode of the Outer Limits I'd say is outdated at all. Like, it's really one of those shows that just stands the test of time. I think it does so even better than Twilight Zone in some respects. Now, before we continue and start the list off, I should mention that I also really like the Outer Limits reboot that went on in the 90s. So I might do I might do that next year. Either that, or I might do the Ray Bradbury Theater, because I've seen a lot of the Ray Bradbury Theater, and there's some really underrated classics in there. So look out for that. You know, I hope to turn this annual, you know, top list into a kind of tradition, because I mean, you know, there's just so many good series out there that don't have top 10 lists on YouTube, and I think it's a real shame. There might be some lists for Outer Limits. You know, I just think it really deserves, you know, so many good shows that don't get enough exposure. Also, you might notice this isn't coming out on Halloween. That's because this isn't actually the Halloween special. The Halloween special is going to be a look at H.P. Lovecraft versus Edgar Allan Poe, why H.P. Lovecraft is a giant racist, and so on. So that should be fun. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk Outer Limits.
We are controlling transmission.
Outer Limits is interesting because it was Twilight Zone's only real competitor in the sci-fi genre, and they ran at the same time. And I think Outer Limits tried to distinguish itself from Twilight Zone, because Twilight Zone always has these very philosophical stories with moral implications and layered characters that are really deep, you know. And, you know, like I said, it's hit or miss. There are some episodes that just fall flat on their face because they're so heavy-handed. But other episodes are really good and have really good acting and really good scripts, and, you know. But Outer Limits Outer Limits tries more to be just campy, fun science fiction. And that isn't to say that there are some episodes of Outer Limits which don't contain, a statement on humanity or a statement on the state of the world. The Architects of Fear certainly has a lot to say about politics and everything, but at the end of the day, you don't watch Outer Limits for the characters. You watch it for the wacky aliens and the fun premises and just the jolly hijinks of, classic science fiction. I think maybe that's one reason why Outer Limits isn't as well remembered, because it really takes a lot of risks, and a lot of the episodes are pretty goofy. A lot of them have really cool special effects, which is something Twilight Zone didn't have so much, because it tried more to be about the characters than the look and feel of the world. But Outer Limits has some really cool special effects that really just, are just so good. In fact, I don't know how people mix up Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, because first off, Twilight Zone's always in black and white, Night Gallery's always in color, so you'd think someone would be able to remember whether something's in color or black and white and go, oh yeah, that's obviously Night Gallery. With Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, it makes a little more sense. I mean, they are both in black and white, but they're just such different shows on so many levels. They're so different. I just think to confuse the two, it's like, how are you confusing Outer Limits with Twilight Zone? That's an apples and oranges situation. There's, in fact, that's the first sketch in that garbage 80s Twilight Zone movie that just has like 3 classic Twilight Zone episodes done shit with like new actors, and then the one original skit is just like this guy and he's in like Vietnam, and apparently like him and 2 kids died on filming, but they just went ahead and filmed it. The opening bit in that is 2 guys are driving in a car, and then one of them's like, hey, remember that one about the guy with the stopwatch that could stop time? And one of them's like, yeah, that was an Outer Limits. And then the other guy's like, no, it wasn't. It was a Twilight Zone episode. And the other guy, no, it was an Outer Limits. And it's like, how do you mix that up? Outer Limits would never have an episode about a magic stopwatch that stops time, because none of the Outer Limits episodes even remotely involve magical plot contrivances like that. That's an exclusively Twilight Zone thing. That's not to say I hate magic stuff, but that's just a Twilight Zone thing, so it's ridiculous to think that anyone would confuse that with an Outer Limits episode. Outer Limits was the hard sci-fi of its day. Sure, it took a lot of liberties and tried to be, fanciful at times and embellish things, but it really did try to adhere to what was known about science at the time, and I think that makes it a lot of fun. So here are my top 7 picks for the best of the Outer Limits. Let's get right into it.
We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical.
Okay, at number 7, we're starting off here with Cold Hands, Warm Heart. This is a staple in William Shatner's career. I don't think early Shatner gets enough praise. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is absolutely great. It's one of those episodes that just like, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet's great. He's also in The Mystic Seer, or I forget what the actual episode name is, Nick of Time, I think so. Both of those obviously Twilight Zone, but Cold Hands, Warm Heart is really pretty good. And there's even an entire section on the Outer Limits Wikipedia page that notes all the ways in which the Outer Limits, more than Twilight Zone, influenced Star Trek. In this, William Shatner plays an astronaut who's assigned to a project called Project Vulcan. And apparently one of the aliens in the Outer Limits also appeared on The Cage. So that's pretty cool. Outer Limits and Star Trek actually have more in common than Star Trek and Twilight Zone. I think that's kind of neat. William Shatner is one of those actors who, there's just no reason to hate him as much as people do. I mean, sure, his later career wasn't that great. New Enterprise was a giant steaming pile of dog shit, but Star Trek Generations is fun, and at least he hasn't said anything racist or homophobic, at least as far as I know, like so many other, old celebrities do in their old age. F in the chat for Chevy Chase, am I right? Anyway, I think William Shatner definitely gives his all in this epic episode, Cold Hands, Warm Heart, and you can just feel his struggle as he's alienated from the Earth, and he feels like the voyage into space has changed him somehow. And in that way, it's a lot like the Twilight Zone episode, what is it? The one with the astronauts that leave and then they all disappear one by one. I forget what it's called. Escaped my mind. Yeah, I don't know what it's called. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of like that one in that sense, and it's about an astronaut who's just feeling kind of shit because he's away from Earth so much. And, that's a classic staple of sci-fi. You got Ray Bradbury's story, Rocket Man, later turned into the Elton John song, of course. So, Cold Hands, Warm Heart is just a really good episode, and if you're interested in William Shatner, then this is one you don't want to miss. At number 6, we have a feasibility study. Again, not the best Outer Limits has to offer. Kind of a generic episode, but it separates itself from its peers, in my opinion, because it's just a really cool episode with a lot of character development, and a lot of people would confuse a feasibility study with Stopover in a Quiet Town in the Twilight Zone. And, I wouldn't say Outer Limits ripped it off, really. I would just say that a feasibility study is like Stopover in a Quiet Town, but done a lot more seriously. There's no miniature train set, no fake squirrel, no fake food, no little alien girl at the end who picks them up and she's like, hey, it's my new doll set, haha. Feasibility study is like Stopover in a Quiet Town, but like taken to the limits. Like if you can imagine Stopover in a Quiet Town, just imagine that like turned into like a real like hard science fiction story, and you've pretty much got a feasibility study. It's such a fascinating episode in so many ways, and I think it separates itself from Stopover, just by being really, really focused. It's a really focused episode. It's also a really sad episode, but I think, as far as drama goes, this might be one of the most human episodes of The Outer Limits that focuses less on the aliens and more on the people. And it has a lot in common with Ray Bradbury stories, or more so Stephen King stories, where you have these human characters that are pit against otherworldly phenomena. It's a lot like The Mist. In fact, I think there's a lot of fog in this one. I'm very nostalgic about a feasibility study because I think, along with the one with the rocks that eat your face, this was one of the first ones I ever saw on VHS a long time ago, so definitely give a feasibility study a watch if you haven't. It's a darn good episode, and it definitely gets that's why it gets number 6 on this list. Good episode, good stuff, and it seems at first glance like one of the more generic alien ones, like Obit or Woodwork or Don't Open Till Doomsday. But seriously, a feasibility study is just really good. It's a really good episode. Okay, number 5, we got Nightmare. Nightmare is, I believe, one of the episodes that was remade for the 90s show, and I'll never really understand that, why both in the Outer Limits reboot, which, like I said, is actually really good, and the Twilight Zone reboot in the 80s, which was just the hottest garbage. I'm not sure why they felt the need to remake their more memorable episodes. It just seems like a huge waste of potential, because I mean you're not going to do it better, so I just don't know what that's all about. But I haven't seen the Nightmare remake. Who knows, it could be okay. But Nightmare is definitely a standout episode of the original Outer Limits, just because it's like To Serve Man, but actually good. Now, if you've watched my top 10 worst Twilight Zone episodes list, I think I put To Serve Man on there, and that's just because it's really lame. I've read the original story by Damon Knight, and I actually like the original story, but Damon Knight's stories are jokes. They're not meant to be taken seriously. And To Serve Man just plays the idea up so much and presents it in such a serious light that it just ruins it. Like, the joke is that, oh, it's a cookbook. And it sounds like a bad SNL sketch, right? Nightmare is a much better episode than just, oh, the aliens are going to eat the people, ha ha ha, so funny. Nightmare is just awesome. It's about man's brutality of man, wartime psychological warfare, which, back then that was a totally new thing. That was a totally new and exciting, thing with like MK Ultra and everything. So Nightmare is just very ahead of its time in that regard. Because you didn't used to think that soldiers could get PTSD or something. But this episode's like, what if there's like this weird study and like there's aliens and stuff, and it's just amazing. It takes like Vietnam, pressure, and I guess this is before Vietnam, but it just takes that and puts it on a cosmic scale. The Ebonites are so cool. They have such a nice character design, and they really look pretty scary. And they're so much better than the Canaanites. Like, no question. To Serve Man is like the off-brand garbage version of Nightmare. I have no idea why Nightmare doesn't get more praise. Maybe it's just because of the kind of generic title, which I agree, that is a really generic title. It should have been called like Disaster on Ebon or something. But the Ebonites are really cool aliens, and they really look good. I mean, they just look awesome. Another big thing that Nightmare has going for it is its presentation of a multiracial future society, which I think, obviously Star Trek did, but if you remember, Outer Limits kind of influenced Star Trek in a lot of ways. Nightmare has a black guy, an Asian guy, and they're on the astronaut team too, and I just think that's such a smart choice. All the flashback sequences are really trippy and scary, and this is definitely probably the scariest episode of The Outer Limits. Like, it's just a mind-bending freak show that it's gonna spook you. If you haven't seen it, give this one a watch. You have no reason not to. It's a classic. Check it out. It's really, really good. And it has such a better message than To Serve Man. Again, I don't know why I'm comparing the two. They really have nothing in common, but I just like the Ebonites way more than the Canaanites, and it's a real shame that, this is one of those episodes I'm like, man, I sure wish Outer Limits wasn't so, downtrodden by Twilight Zone, because it has gems like this. It has absolute bangers like Nightmare. They're just so good. Anyway, Nightmare is at number 5. Okay, number 4 here, we got the Zeta Misfits. This is this was put on, according to the Wikipedia page, a top 100 episodes of all time list, which I don't know. The premise itself is kind of weak. The characters aren't very memorable, the human characters anyway. But the Zeta Misfits just look so fun. I gotta put it on this list somewhere. So, it's a little better than Nightmare in that, the Zeta Misfits just have an even cooler character design than the Ebonites. I mean, Outer Limits has some very creative alien designs, but the Zeta Misfits just stand out by virtue of being stop motion. And if you know me, it's that I love me some stop motion. The Zeta Misfits, they got they're so adorable, and they have such a cool face, and it's iconic, and it's probably the most iconic character design from The Outer Limits. Like, even if you haven't seen the show, you know how a Zeta Misfit looks. Look it up on Google Images, you'll know it instantly. Zeta Misfits are great. I really like the Zeta Misfits. And this is one of the few episodes of Outer Limits that actually has a twist ending, which I think it pulls off pretty well, and it kind of puts Night Gallery to shame with just how well this twist ending is pulled off. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, but Zeta Misfits, lots of fun, lots of just cool special effects. This is definitely Outer Limits' most special effects heavy episode, but it's also just really good. give it a watch if you haven't. I definitely suggest this one. It's a lot of fun, and you're gonna have a good time watching it. It's one of those things where you're like, how did I miss out on this? So many people have. It's a real shame. Number 3 is The Man That Was Never Born. This is a really nice time travel episode for a change. You know, a lot of Outer Limits episodes are about aliens. This one goes with the time travel route. And I think the only other one that has to do with the time travel is Soldier, written by Harlan Ellison. This one I don't think is written by Harlan Ellison. But The Man That Was Never Born is just a real good story. And it's one of the few post-apocalyptic stories that I'm like, yeah, okay. You know, if you know me, it's that I really hate Mad Max or most post-apocalyptic stuff in general, just because I think it's kind of lame. Like, if the world is over, then there's no stakes, you know, so nothing the characters do will actually matter. Whereas with Man Who Was Never Born, it incorporates time travel into it in a really fun and cool way. And I think the time travel mechanics are just the best. Also, the title is just like, it brings so many questions to mind. Like, how can you be a guy that's never born? How does that work? And when you get to the end, you realize, oh, this is how it works. He was never born. I'm not going to spoil how that works out, but it's just so good. You know, this was a formative time in post-apocalyptic fiction. The 60s were the first decade where, you know, real risks were taken. You got the Burgess Meredith episode where, you know, he breaks his glasses. Oh, no, I don't have my I think that one's kind of stupid. You got One More Pallbearer, which I've talked about, which is just really good. And I don't know why nobody talks about it. One More Pallbearer is really good. And in most iterations in the 60s, a post-apocalyptic landscape was portrayed as a kind of rubble-strewn desert with, like, you know, buildings and stuff everywhere. And I think that's something that's missing from today's post-apocalyptic movies like Fury Road, where they just try and make everything as extravagant and stupid as possible with all these big cars chasing each other. You know, in a post-apocalyptic scenario, it's not going to be fun for anyone. It's going to be pretty shit. The Man That Was Never Born definitely captures that. The sets are really nice, and the makeup on the guy, it's just amazing. You look at the guy and you're like, okay, this is a guy that's been through some shit. This is an accurate depiction of a nuclear fallout victim here, you know. That's some Chernobyl on that guy's face. Just very cool. Definitely the best Outer Limits episode to deal with time travel. It has a really cool and fun paradox that I don't think I've seen in any other episode of any time travel thing. You know, I just really like how, you know, this adds stakes, like I said, and that you can go back and prevent the apocalypse before it happens. No spoilers, but it's just a really good episode. And, yeah, so Man That Was Never Born is number 3. Maybe it shouldn't be this high, but I just feel it's a really underrated episode of Outer Limits. At number 2, now we're getting into the really good shit, Demon with the Glass Hand. I almost put this at number 1, but I figured everyone's list of the Outer Limits puts this at number 1. I want to be a little different, and I think my number 1 pick could easily outrank this, but Demon with the Glass Hand is number 2 just because it's definitely the second best episode. Even if there's an episode better than it, it's in the upper echelons. It is an episode that's so deep and so thought-provoking that you're like, this was the 60s? Like, if all you think about when you think of 60s sci-fi or 50s sci-fi is just like, yeah, it was just cheesy and corny and lame, and The Matrix is the new sci-fi. I like myself some Under the Skin. I like myself some Interstellar. Then watch Demon with a Glass Hand, and all your misconceptions about the history of the genre will be set straight, because you'll be like, this was the 60s? Oh my gosh, they were smarter than I thought. Now, in part, of course, this is because Demon with the Glass Hand is written by an absolute mad genius, Harlan Ellison, and he only wrote 2 episodes of the show. But this episode just makes you wonder, like, man, what would it have been like if you wrote all the episodes? Outer Limits would have been way more well-remembered than even Twilight Zone. Of course that's impossible. He was a busy guy, but Demon with the Glass Hand is just so awesome. And it's better than the other Ellison episode. Harlan Ellison is one of those figures I have really mixed feelings about, because his work is so hit or miss, but when he nails it, he absolutely nails it. You have I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is just objectively a piece of shit story with like no redeeming qualities, but thanks to tons of videos being made about it and tons of, oh yeah, it's the best story he ever wrote. Like, no, it's not. Have you even bothered to read any of his other stories? Like, he's done so much better shit than just, oh, bunch of sad people are held captive by this evil supercomputer. He's written so much better shit. And, it's just a shame that his actual good stories, like In the Fourth Year of the War, Jeff Dees 5, never get any coverage, and I have no idea why, because they're so good. They just have so much potential. And then you got A Boy and His Dog is the only other Ellison story I ever hear about, and that's just because it's inspired Fallout. Well, guess what? Fallout is a giant piece of shit. And A Boy and His Dog is also just a giant piece of shit. What if there was a youngster and he was searching the irradiated wastelands and his dog could talk, and all he ever thought about was having sex with women? I don't even know what Harlan Ellison was thinking when he wrote that shit. He must have been on some shrooms or something. Heck, he must have been on something, because it's not a good story, and it really shows. A Boy and His Dog is just garbage. So like I said, Harlan Ellison is really hit or miss, and it's bizarre that nobody ever brings up Demon with the Glass Hand much. Well, they do, It's well remembered by those who have seen it, but no one ever talks about as much as I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And it's just so much better. Demon with the Glass Hand is just so awesome. It's a lot like Dark City. If you like Dark City like I do, I'm a total Dark City simp over here, then you'll definitely like Demon with the Glass Hand. They both have the same kind of vibes. The aliens in Demon with the Glass Hand really remind me of the Watchers from Dark City, and I really like that. They're very menacing and cool, and they have an excellent character design, and the main character is just a guy you can really be like, yeah, this is a cool premise. The main guy is such a good actor that, it's just great. And I do think it has a lot in common with I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Like in I Have No Mouth, most of humanity is on the moon or something. At least that's in the video game version. But in Demon with a Glass Hand, they're all like in this tiny little chip in this guy's hand. Oh yeah, spoilers, by the way. They're all in this tiny little chip in this guy's hand, and he's actually a robot. So I think at the end, humanity is restored back to what it was, but he's just a robot. He's just the vessel of humanity. I think that's so cool. And the world is so mysterious and shadowy, and you're just wondering the whole time, like, what exactly is going on here? And it pulls some, like, serious gut punches that only Harlan Ellison knows how to pull off. It's just so good. Demon with the Glass Hand, check it out. A lot of people, like I said, do give this one the credit it deserves, but it's a good episode. And, Harlan Ellison is a good writer for the most part. Yet he has some total shit in his catalog, total overrated hot garbage, but then there's stuff like this, and I 100% approve Demon with the Glass Hand. I can get behind it. It's a lot of fun. Give it a go. It's one of the most cerebral 60s sci-fi things out there. It's, maybe that's why it's not so well remembered, just because it was too hard for 60s audiences to comprehend, because they had to sit down and watch it all the way through. But this is absolutely thinking man's television right here. Demon with the Glass Hand at number 2. Okay, it's time for number 1. Like I said, I almost put Demon with the Glass Hand here, but I think there is a better episode that is just my personal favorite for a lot of reasons, and that is, of course, The Sixth Finger. It's just so good. It's so fun. And it doesn't have a time travel plot or an alien plot. It's 100% an original concept that I really haven't seen done to such an extent before or since. So props to the Outer Limits for taking a risk with this episode. And I think this is an episode that is just, it's definitely a product of the kind of heightened awareness of the 60s that came about when, all these new discoveries were made. You have the evolutional aspect, you have the genetic aspect. Both of these, back in the 50s, people were like, no, I doubt that we came from apes. But the six finger is daring, and it says, yeah, we did come from apes, and look at what we're going to turn into in a couple million years. And I just think that's such a cool premise, and the Outer Limits absolutely delivers. The makeup on the guy is so awesome. He starts out as just like this coal farmer, and he's like mining for coal, and his face is all dirty, and he's like in rags. And then over the course of the episode, you just see him become this heightened superhuman with six fingers and a giant globe of a head, and it's just like, wow, this is awesome. So I gotta put this at number one. It's just so cool and so fun, and in a sense it represents everything that Outer Limits tried to be and tried to do, which is to tell entertaining science fiction stories with no real, philosophical or moral implications. Outer Limits is always more of a hypothetical scenario, like what if? What if so-and-so happened? What if this happened? How could this be scientifically possible? And the six finger is just really good. It's set in a small town. A lot of the best sci-fi stories are set in small towns, because they have that just uncanny feeling to them where you feel like, this shouldn't really be happening here, but somehow against all odds, placid Americana is disrupted by this guy with six fingers, and he's coming out of nowhere and shaking things up. In a lot of ways I'd say it has a striking resemblance to H.G. Wells' story Food of the Gods, but in many other ways it's entirely its own thing. You should definitely check this one out if you haven't. It's just a really fun episode, and it's really, what I find really crazy is that it actually has a happy ending, which is, a lot of the Outer Limits episodes are really sad and bleak, but this one just kind of ends, pretty happy. There are some early examples of, guys being turned into cavemen. There's one called, I think, The Neanderthal Man, which I've seen, and there's, also, there's some movies and stuff before this where evolution was turned backwards, but only a really ahead of its time show like The Outer Limits would think, what would happen if we turned the dial forwards, and this guy just goes full on psycho, psychic, ballistic mode, and it's just so fun to watch. And it's a lot like, it has a lot in common with the episode Star Trek Where No Man Has Gone Before. Like I said, Star Trek takes a lot of influence from The Outer Limits. Both have these, heightened superhuman beings with godlike powers. I just think The Six Finger is definitely the best episode of The Outer Limits. As far as I see it, it's so good. It's everything The Outer Limits is in one episode. Like everything The Outer Limits tries to be a fun, entertaining science fiction spectacle. The Six Finger is the best episode of The Outer Limits. Go watch it, check it out, have a look.
We can change the focus to a soft blur or sharpen it to crystal clarity.
And with that, that's the best 7 episodes of The Outer Limits, from worst all the way up to best. Again, there really aren't any episodes of The Outer Limits that I would say are actually that bad. For a pretty short series with only 49 episodes, it had a pretty good run. And it doesn't feel short, because all the episodes are an entire hour, unlike Twilight Zone, which is only a half an hour per episode. So you get a lot more, time for fun stuff to go on. And Outer Limits is the more fun of the series, with Twilight Zone being kind of more you know, it takes less risks. I think The Outer Limits maybe failed because it did take a lot of risks, but that's also why it's become such a beloved cult classic, and why, in my opinion, it's easily as good as Twilight Zone. Just very different, you know, it's a very different type show, and it should be remembered for that, and it should be appreciated because it's some good stuff. Lots of really ahead of its time type stuff. It's a very groundbreaking show. And everyone talks about the War of the Worlds broadcast, but it's like, you know, back in the 60s, when an alien took over your TV every week at a specific time, wasn't that awesome? Wasn't it totally cool when, like, your TV just became this weird buzz of transmission static and this control voice is like, you are about to be transported to the outer limits? Isn't that awesome? And in many ways, it's like even more immersive than the Twilight Zone theme song, because, you know, with the Twilight Zone intro, it's just like, you're entering another dimension, signpost up ahead, next stop Twilight Zone, you know, which is okay for bringing you into this world of wacky hijinks, but The Outer Limits goes one step further, and it's like, yeah, this is actually happening. Your TV is getting controlled by some kind of extra-dimensional, you know, electric shit. And I just think that that's a really fun angle that has not been explored as well in any science fiction before or since. Just the idea that your TV is getting hijacked and there's nothing you can do about it, and you've just got to sit there and watch all this weird shit take place in front of you. It's just so much fun, and it's one of the things that definitely makes The Outer Limits stand out, and, you know, makes it very memorable. It's not as well remembered as Twilight Zone, which is a real shame because it's easily as good a show. But, you know, that's the 7 best episodes. Watch them this Halloween. I guarantee you're gonna have a fun time because it's just classic sci-fi at its best. And yeah, that's about all I have to say about The Outer Limits. What a great show. Looking forward to next Halloween so I can put together another one of these top 10 lists. They're a lot of fun to compile and talk about. And yeah, anyway, thanks for watching my Night Gallery video so much. It's just blown up in views. Who'd have thought? But yeah, if you're an Outer Limits fan, leave your 7 favorites in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. And until then, I'm gonna buzz out.